Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about online safety and what to do about it. You can hear that I have a bit of a rough voice. I have been sick. I'm on the other side of it. Yesterday, I was just like, fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything crossed, and it all worked out. But I'm feeling much better today, and we're all good. But I will not be shaking hands. I'll just keep all this up here. But nice to meet you all. Maine is gorgeous. Thank you for having me. We went yesterday to Burlington in the evening, and my daughter wants to live in the Nest bookstore. She's decided she's created a little home for herself there. So we very much have enjoyed our time. And as she said, this is going to be taped, so hello to everybody who is out there in the world watching this on a different day. Thank you for making time for being here. We believe it's a kid's job to be a kid, and it's the grown-up's job to keep them safe. And that means that adults need to take ownership in these problems that our kids are navigating so that they can come to us if they have problems. This stuff should never rest solely on the shoulders of kids. On this day, October 22nd, in 1989, Jacob Wetterling was abducted in Minnesota. Our agency is named after Jacob. For those of you who don't know the case, because in Maine, many people don't, in Minnesota, this was our largest manhunt ever in our state. But Jacob and his brother and his friend were biking in the evening on October 22nd, on this day, and a man approached the three of them who had a gun and was wearing a ski mask. Not common in rural Minnesota, where we're from. Jacob was separated from Trevor and Aaron and was taken, and Trevor and Aaron ran home, got the babysitter who got her dad, who called 911, and it began this huge response to try to find out who had Jacob. And we didn't know for 27 years. And 27 years later, Jacob, the person who had taken him, was arrested. It's a long, long story, but something to dig into if it's something that you want to learn more about. And that individual did eventually lead law enforcement to where he had buried Jacob. We were able to have a funeral. And his family had started the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center in his honor to help prevent crimes from happening to kids. So Jacob and I grew up together. For me, this was, he sat next to me in 6th grade math class. We did theater camp together. And different people handled trauma in different ways. But I was the kid in the public library in 6th grade being like, where are your books on sex offenders? And the librarian was like, do you have a parent permission slip? Like, I don't know how to navigate this with you, but I'm one of those people who the more I learn about something, the less freaked out I am. And I'd heard that people, these cases, like what happened to Jacob, are very rare. When they happen, it's usually for sexual abuse. And so I started learning and learning and learning because I wanted to prevent this from happening. I've been working with the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center now since 2001. I serve as the director. His mom, when Jacob was taken, was our PTA president. His dad was the advisor for the NAACP of Central Minnesota. So they're both community organizers. They're very good at getting the word out. And we did a good job as best as we could to get the word out. But we realized very quickly how many kids are at risk in cases that are not like Jacob's, but are stuff where things are happening in their own homes. Things are happening with people they know. And so we wanted to get ahead of the problem, and we try to do that every day. But just to date myself, our first fundraiser for the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center in 1990, when we were founded, was for a brand new invention called the fax machine. We were going to take Jacob's poster, and we were going to fax it out. It's our first big fundraiser. It was this new technology that we just began. And so we look at how far we've come and how many kids now know what a fax machine is, right? It's like, just send a PDF. So, but it's good to be with you all in person. We've been doing a lot of online training and a lot of sort of inward stuff in the last few years. And what we've noticed is a lot of kids are online more because of tablets and things and trying to do learning at home. And that was good for physical safety, but we need to get to where kids need to be for emotional safety. And a part of that is being aware. The more we can turn outward, the better. I love Barbara Coloroso's work when she talks about just families in general. I like to apply this to internet safety. Barbara Coloroso, who's a phenomenal author, she writes about 3 different kinds of families. They have the jellyfish family, who are like, anything goes, we have no limits, stay up as late as you want, eat all the sugar, right? And there's some goodness there, but yeah. And then we have the Brook Wall family, who's like, we'll be at bed at 8 p.m. We will not have anything ever. You will not have a phone until you're 25. You're not allowed to show that you have emotions, right? So very broad ends of the spectrum. And what we're going for is the backbone family, where we have structure, we have rules, we have basics that kids know and can live by, and we have some freedom of muscle. So like, yes, normally bedtime is at 8:30, but we are staying in a hotel, and there's a swimming pool, and that is open till 9. So yes, tonight we can stay up till 9, right? Like, it's that idea of like that backbone. And I think of this, excuse me, with internet safety, that we don't want to go on either end of the extreme of like, we have no idea what's going on with your online life, or you're not allowed to ever have access ever. We want to create that middle ground of that backbone. And that's our goal today, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. In backbone families, we learn to accept our feelings. That's going to happen. Just willing to seek help. We're buffered by our dangers, by being told, I like myself, I can think for myself, I can do this. I told the kids yesterday, technology itself isn't all bad, it's how we use it. You would not hand a kid a blowtorch. Say, go explore, see how it goes. They're going to hurt themselves, they're going to hurt somebody else. We don't want to hand kids technology without guardrails, without some limits, some training, some supervision, some buy-in, some tracking. Most kids have access to the internet. Most kids have access to different, whether it's game consoles, phones, things like that. And I find it interesting, teens themselves, over half say they spend too much time on their phones. But it's not just a teenager problem. I mean, adults, we spend a lot of time on our phones as well. Like, it's a culture that is very technology-based, and they're responding to the culture that we've created. And so how do we create balance? It's funny, I started teaching internet safety in 2001, and the number one question I would get from parents in 2001, should we get a computer? We've been going back and forth on the pros and cons, should we get one? I haven't heard that question in 20 years, right? Like, it's been a while, but that's where we started, was should we get one? And now, it's interesting how the questions ebb and flow. The questions I hear the most right now are the questions of, how do I create limits for my kids so that they're not always on their phone? How can we create limits so they're not always on technology? And that limit is so important. We're going to talk about that today. Part of it is modeling. Over half of teens say, I'm trying to talk to my parents about something and they're on their phone. I admit, as a parent, I do that, right? So it's not, I'm not standing up here being like, I have this all figured out. We're all figuring it out as we go along. Teenagers check their phones usually about once an hour. Kids are spending about 9 hours a day using the media. On average, an American checks their phone 344 times a day. That's once every 4 minutes. So we think about, what does that balance look like? And it's not just kids. I don't want to vilify kids. My parents are members of the AARP, and they had their newsletter out. And one of the articles in the AARP was sexting, how to do it as a senior. And I was like, Mom, Dad, what are you reading? What is this? Oh, it's the AARP magazine. I'm like, it's not just kids who are engaging in behaviors that could be concerning online. It's more concerning, obviously, when they're kids. We have to remember everyone's a sexual being. I have to remember that myself. But I just don't want to vilify kids for things that we as adults are figuring out as well. So we'll start with sleep. Teenagers need the most of it, and they get the least amount of it. Anecdotally, I asked kids often where they sleep, where they put their phone when they sleep. And usually in a group of 30, I have 2 or 3 who sleep with it on their chest, because they say, I want to be a good friend. I don't want to miss if my friend is having a problem. So I sleep with it on my chest so that I'm ready if there's an issue. I think about just the boundary of needing to clear your brain and be ready for the next day, and how difficult that is when phones are right there. And so when we think about limits, when we think about boundaries with sleep, it's like, maybe we just turn off the Wi-Fi at 10 p.m. and turn it back on in the morning. Maybe we just say, make the parent the bad guy, right? Say, my parent says phones have to go in the kitchen to charge overnight. I'm really sorry if you ever try to call me at night. I'm not going to be able to get to it, right? So thinking about different ways so that kids can get that sleep. These patterns and patterns I'm going to be talking about today, way easier to start these when kids are 10, 11, 12 with this is what we do, versus you going home today and telling your 17-year-old, we're going to move the phone to the kitchen at night. And they're like, Allison, right? It's much easier to start some of these behaviors young and to get ahead of this before it's an issue. Discovery Magazine did an older study where they looked and they found that the more times girls, this was specifically girls who subscribed to their magazine, girls spent with their screens, the less sleep they got, the lower their self-esteem. Then we look at the more recent, I'm gonna go back here. Why do you think that is? I asked the kids that yesterday. I shouldn't say kids. I asked the teens that yesterday. They had some really good responses. Why do you think it is the more time kids spend with screens, lower self-esteem? There's probably 30 reasons, but what are a few we could come up with? You don't get a realistic picture, right? Because it's people's highlight reels of their life. People always say, like, your child's always smiling in pictures. She looks so happy. I'm like, I don't post the ones where she's having a tantrum, you know? Like, I'm not gonna be like, hey, everyone, look at my child having a bad day. So we see each other's best days, and then we're living our days, and it doesn't feel realistic. So there's a part of that. What else? Cyberbullying. So it's like one of the #1 rules on the internet is don't read the comments, right? So if we post a video of ourselves singing and the comments are mean, we're reading that, we're feeling horrible. And we don't have that balance of like your music teacher being like, you have come so far, keep working on it. And you're like, that's not what they think, right? So cyberbullying, what else? Yeah. Inability to focus. And this is again dating myself. I won't do that much. But I was getting my undergrad, when I would finish a paper, or finish like a page on writing a research paper, I'd be like, now I'm gonna play a game of Free Cell. Now I'm gonna play, to reward myself. Then 10 years later, when I was getting my master's, I'd finish a page of a research paper. I'm like, wonder what's happening on Twitter. Wonder what's going on Instagram. What's happening on Facebook? Then I was like, what was I writing about? Like an hour and a half later. And that's me with my fully developed adult brain trying to track what's going on. So just the distraction of being present. I do a lot of youth ministry stuff. And we did a retreat that went from a Thursday to a Sunday with no phones. And we said, if you're gonna come, it's Thursday through Sunday, no phones. And I had a young man come to me, he goes, Allison, I have a phantom phone in my pocket. It's buzzing. It's not there, but I can feel it buzzing. Like, it's like, you know, you're having that sense of it. It's like, yeah, we're taking a break from that and being present. And the other thing that was funny was we had some of the kids like writing to each other in a notebook that weekend. So like older kids would be like, hope you're having a good week. And you'd flip the page, you write back, I am having a good week. And at the end of the weekend, you'd find out who had been writing to you all week, like this reveal of I was your pen pal. But one of the 9th graders was looking at this book and he's like, I don't get it. I said, oh, someone's writing to you, just flip the page and write back. And he's like, so it's like a text, but instead of send, I flip the page? I was like, yeah, that's exactly, you know, but just, and then the last thing I'll say is they had to write a letter home, and over half of the 9th graders had no idea how to address a letter, like with a stamp and whatever, just because culturally we're not, you know, and that's, so yes, that piece of just distraction and having it be consistent. Any other thoughts about this? And I never call on people if your hands aren't up, so don't worry. I don't like being called on when my hand isn't up. Yeah.
Young children see their parents on a phone a lot, and they want to be like their parents. They want to grow up fast. So
Yeah.
having a phone is cool, and if you're looking at it all the time, you obviously have a lot of friends, and it's the role model which you referred to earlier.
Right, kids want to be older, kids want to explore new things. This looks like this cool thing, so like, let me try it, right? So there's that idea of, if you have young kids and you've seen them, my child has like a Sesame Street phone, and she'll sometimes be talking on it, and you're like, oh, that's the modeling right there, you know, excuse me, I'm doing some work, you know, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what, we're modeling what we see. So that interest as well, absolutely. And I think there's just that sense of, every time you get a like, you get a hit of dopamine in your brain. And so you're seeking out that like, you're seeking out, I'm not one to say this is an app to be worried about, this is an app to be worried about, because every app has problems. I've advocated for kids who have been targeted on apps I was not expecting. It's the behavior of someone approaching you on an app to be concerned about. It's the behavior of someone asking for a picture on an app. And yes, there are some apps that lead themselves more to concerns and apps that allow for that photo sharing. But I'm always really careful. I say, if your child is creating content online, be wary, because every time they get that hit of dopamine, they want to one-up it with something better on the next content. Like, if your child's really interested in sharing a dance, put it on your account that you see and you monitor and you screen comments and you delete, and you can let them know, yeah, you had these are the 10 relatives I shared it with. This is what they said. Make it close, things like that. Because when kids are creating content, they're constantly seeking the newest best thing. And it's like, well, if Joey jumped off a bridge, would you? It's like, well, who else is going to be there? Are they filming it? Then maybe I will, right? It's tricky years, though. We want to start this stuff young because 12 to 17 is the age that's most targeted. Who here wants to relive 12 to 17 for fun? If you're at home, feel free to raise your hand if you want to. Who here, anyone, sometimes in a room this size we'll have one person who wants to relive 12 to 17 for fun. If that's you, we will not judge you. We'll support you. Yeah, that. What do you think it is about 12 to 17 that puts kids at such risk? This is another slide we could spend an hour on, but what is it about those years? Yeah. Yeah, they're trying to figure themselves out. So if you will accept me if I do this, I'm going to do this, right? And I should have said this caveat. There are a lot of different kids between the ages of 12 to 17. So I'm speaking really broad strokes. There's some 16-year-olds I would trust to do childcare for me. There's some 16-year-olds I'm not going to give a hot glue gun to, right? And sometimes it's the same kid, like on a Monday versus a Friday. So we're speaking in broad terms about a very vast group of kids. So I just want to be real with that. Okay. So trying to fit in is one problem. What else? I'll throw the word puberty in there. So we have puberty where you're attracted to people who weren't attracted to you before. And what do I do with this? And my body's changing and I have all these different things going on. And that might influence how I act and what the decisions I make. Other thoughts? Yeah, innocent, gullible, vulnerable. And it's that idea of the Roman Catholic Church has a curriculum about safety. And one of the phrases that I love that they use is that kids this age are very internet savvy, but are not internet smart. And I think that there's that difference of they're the ones who are going to check the clocks for daylight savings and do that for your house. Because you're like, I don't know how that works. But when it comes to the person approaching them, ask them for a sexual picture, that's a different kind of smarts that hasn't been practiced or developed yet usually. And so savvy versus smart, and it's harder to ask for help when they're like, I've got this. This is my world, I know this, versus, so that piece too, yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, more independence, less supervision. It's their job description to live on their own eventually. And this is when they're doing that work. It is the parent's job description to keep them safe. And those job descriptions don't always fit. One person's like, I got this. And you're like, but do you really? And a lot of the conflict in these are hard conflict years because your young person is trying to be independent and you're trying to keep them safe. And sometimes just having a conversation about those job descriptions. I recognize this is your job description, but my job description is to keep you safe, so we got to work together on this. Yeah, any other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. The brain isn't done yet. And I'm going to talk about brain development. The last part of the brain to be done is the part of the brain that says, is this a good idea? That develops in their 20s. Interestingly enough, if they have something that happens and they have to live through the consequence, their brain will access that because they don't want to do it again. So we have to let our kids live through the consequences, as awkward as it is, but as lovingly as we can, because if we pull the consequence, their brain isn't going to make that connection. And my mom growing up, I grew up with all brothers, and she used to say to my brothers and I just pray every night that if you do something wrong, you get caught and punished right away. We're like, who prays that, Mom? Who prays that? She's like, well, if you steal a candy bar and someone catches you and you have to pay the guy back and apologize, then when someone wants you to steal a car, you're not gonna because you had to deal with the stuff for the candy bar. She's like, so I just pray if you and your brothers do anything wrong, you get caught and punished the first time so it doesn't become a pattern. I was like, oh my God, who does that? She'll be here for lunch today, so you can talk to her about her prayer strategy. But it's that same kind of thing. We look at those years and how tricky they are and how the internet does impact the way they see themselves in the culture. This is from internal Facebook research that was leaked about the idea that young people spending time on Instagram then feel bad about their bodies. And so we think about, did anyone when you're 12 to 17 feel great about your body, right? Like there's that too. But we think about just the pressure and the comparison culture and the celebrity comparison culture as well. When we're comparing ourselves to people who have stylists, wardrobe, makeup, I did not have any help today getting ready. This was all just me. So I did not have the amount of likes as someone who has those skills. And then we look at the age that most kids are getting access is around 10 to 12. The most predominant age where kids are getting a service plan in our country is at age 10. There's a big push to wait until 8th grade. Wait until 8th is a website and is a big campaign so that we give the kids a little bit more chance to let their brains develop and not be so immediate. You can get phones for kids that don't have the web access. You can wait, you can put it off. In general terms, later is better. Parents will say, at what age? It depends on your family. I'm not here to shame families and their choices. That's not what I'm doing here today. But to think about later is better when we think about phones and development. Bill Gates, he says 14, not allowed at the dinner table, and he has time limiting before bed. James Stayer, who runs Common Sense Media, which is a website for parents that has a lot of internet safety resources, he says 14, and in addition to being 14, they have to demonstrate that they can exercise restraint and they understand the value of face-to-face communication. I know adults who can't demonstrate. It's like you go to a movie and the phone goes off. It's usually not the kid whose phone goes off. It's usually, it's that idea. So older is better. But the big message that we have to think about today and think about in the days to come is who's defining healthy. Because if we don't define healthy for kids, the people who do, we're not going to appreciate how it's defined. 85% of people who are teenagers or dating expect to hear from their significant other once a day. 11% expect to hear from them every single hour. Now we look at that, we think of that knob that goes from caring to controlling. And that knob isn't a quick switch from caring to controlling. It's little by little by little. If you work in domestic violence, if you work in sexual assault, we see that all the time where when you meet this person, they seem amazing. They seem too good to be true. They seem phenomenal. And then little by little, that caring turns into controlling. And because it's little by little, then by the time it hits controlling, it's uncomfortable to ask for help. And it's hard to ask for help. And you feel like, is something wrong with me? You think about being a teenager. If we've never talked to a teenager about what does a healthy relationship look like, they have nothing else to compare it to. So if this person says, I want to hear from you every hour, they don't necessarily have the pushback of that's really sketchy, right? So we need to talk about healthy ways to be in relationships, healthy ways to use the internet, healthy before there's a problem, so that they have that. We don't have someone swooping in. We'll talk about that today. One of the big pieces is don't stop talking to parents as kids get older. Some parents feel like, okay, my kid is 11. We've had the discussions about safety. We're good. We want to amp up discussions as kids get older. Kids who are vulnerable offline are the same ones who are vulnerable online. It's kids who are looking for attention and affection. How sad is that? Because we all need attention and affection, especially in these years. And it's the kids looking for attention and affection who are the ones who are being targeted. When you're a kid, we talked about the brain. I'm going to go back to the brain for a little bit. Our brains moderate that need to be liked as we get older. Still nice to be liked, but it moderates versus when they're younger. Adolescents are more vulnerable because their brains are more vulnerable. Adults think with the rational part of their brain. Teenagers are processing with the emotional part of their brain. So if you've ever asked your teenager to take out the garbage and they start crying, you're like, what just happened? They're processing with the emotional part of their brain. Part of their brain doing the most work between these ages is the part of the brain learning how to argue. Do you have kids in your life of that age? Have you seen that skill playing out, right? You ask them to be home at 8 o'clock, they come home at 9 o'clock, and you're like, I asked you to come out at 8. They're like, oh, you asked me to come out at 8 when I was at Jordan's house. Last week I stayed out to Nate's house, you let me stay out till 10. Nate showed up at Jordan's house, so I cut the difference, came home at 9. You're like, what just happened, right? They're using that logic, that brain that's arguing, they're using it against their caregivers because you're the person they're practicing against. And so we need to work with that and figure out, there's a person in Minnesota who teaches some parent education. His name's Tiger McLuhan. And he talks about thinking about online safety and safety in general as a traffic light. And what are your red absolute no's? What are your green yeses? And that you let them win about half of the yellow light battles so that they have a chance to practice their arguing, then they're more likely to respect your red lights. So like, yes, this app is fine. No, this app is not fine. Okay, tell me why you want to use this app. And so that they can practice that arguing and build up those skills. But being aware, the part of their brain said, is this a good idea? Last part to be done. Dr. David Walsh wrote a great book for parents called Why Do They Act This Way? And it's all about the adolescent brain. I used it all the time when I was doing youth ministry for myself. Because I'd be like, why did this just happen? What is happening? I'd be like, oh, chapter 4. But their brain is built to have power struggles. You don't want to get in the power struggles, but you don't want to be a doormat either. So it's about that backbone piece of, yep, I understand that you'd like to do this. Here's why, for safety, I'm setting this boundary. And it starts young. My funny story, I have a 4-year-old who is living her best life at the hotel, I must say. Free cookies in the lobby and a pool. She's in heaven. But she had her school pictures this year at the beginning of the year, preschooler. And she said, Mom, I need nail polish for school pictures. I said, you're 4, you don't need nail polish ever. She's like, I need them for school pictures. I said, you don't see your nails at school. I will know that I'm wearing it. I would like them for school pictures. I said, you do not need nail polish. She said, Mom, you help me make decisions about safety for my body. I make the decisions about beauty. It's like, okay, we're starting this at 4. All right, we're gonna talk about it. But she knows that my job is to talk to people about safety, but she often is like, remind them to wear a bike helmet, like remind them to buckle up. Like that's her context, which is fine. But it is that idea of like, yes, what are the things we can let go? Like, okay, nail polish for the school picture. I'm gonna let that one go today. But when we are gonna buckle up in your car seat, because that's about safety. So it can start young, but her boundary back, yeah, I wasn't ready for that one. I'm never ready. So teenagers use the feeling versus thinking. They're often feeling instead of thinking. And then we look at how offenders are engaging with kids online. The number one way that offenders are engaging with kids online is talking to them about sex. So we think about all these dynamics, about puberty, about wanting to fit in, about being in over their heads, savvy versus smart, all those things. Number one thing that offenders do is look for kids who want to talk about sex. We go to this study, which was people in prison, serving time in prison for offending against kids. They say, what are you looking for when you're trolling? Number one thing, kids who want to talk about sex. If they have so many different kids that they can talk to, they're looking for the easy targets, the low-hanging fruit. Who wants to talk to you about sex? Because if I am the one telling them about sex, I get to define what's healthy. I get to define what's standard. If I say, have you ever heard about this? Well, no, I haven't. Well, let me tell you all about it. So we want to help kids when they're young have good information about their bodies. I'm a child of the 1970s, so I had the phenomenal book, Where Do I Come From? Anyone else? The Sperm in the Top Hat, right? Like that was my book in the 70s. I didn't know it was different from any other book in our bookshelf until my cousin spent the night. And Dad was like, what do you guys want to read tonight? I'm like, Where Do I Come From? My dad was like, no. I do not know what your cousins know about their bodies. We're going to pick a different book. I'm like, it's so good. Like, and then they're interested. Like, what book can we not read? So but that idea of having books around that have information about bodies. My friend, when his daughter hit puberty, he just got her a written journal. Said, if you have questions about your bodies, if you hear things on the bus, if you see things and you're not sure, write it on the journal, put it in my pillow. I will write back and put it on your pillow. We don't have to talk about it. It doesn't have to be awkward, but I want to make sure that you can always ask. And so here's one way to do that, like a little journal back and forth. Finding educational videos. There's a lot of dated ones on YouTube that I remember from middle school, but which are super funny now as an adult. But there's a lot of good stuff out there. Screen it first. Make sure it's something you feel comfortable using, and then sit down with your kid. Watch it. I remember, and this is one more story about my mom, but she would go to the public library and get like audio tapes, and then my brothers and I would sit and listen to them about like safety and bodies and stuff, and my mom would always pre-screen them. And we were like, Mom, can you just leave while we listen to this? Like, it's so awkward having you watch us, like just come back in a half an hour. But that idea about using media for good, right? There's a lot of good educational material out there. We don't want kids Googling breasts and butts. We don't know what's gonna come up. And if we're not giving them good information about their body, there's gonna be always that interest of finding ways to seek it out. And I remember when I was in 3rd grade, we had like a big red dictionary in our classroom. And every so often a whisper would go through the room like, the dictionary is currently opened up to the word penis. What? If you go sharpen your pencil, you will see the word penis in the dictionary. It's like, what? There's always that interest, right? Like everyone's going to sharpen their pencil, be like, oh my, it's really in there. There's always gonna be that interest. So how do we get ahead of that interest and let them know if you have questions about your body, come to me and not to the internet? Because I don't want you to find stuff online that you can't unsee. And if most adults use the internet well, most adults are not trolling for kids. And I have to remind myself of that because I work as an advocate and have for 20 years predominantly with kids and high schoolers. Most adults want what's best for kids. I sometimes forget that because I'm in the world of like, oh, you want to start dance class? Yeah, let's find out who's trained, who has policies, who had like, I'm going to bring you to your first dance class with like a t-shirt that says like, my mom prosecutes. Like that's, you know, where like how my brain is. And I have to remember most people don't hurt kids. Most people don't hurt kids. But the people wanting to talk to kids about sex on the internet are not the healthy adults. And just telling kids that, listen, if someone's trying to talk to you about sex on the internet, they're not one of the healthy adults. Let's just start there. They looked at people who were attempting to meet kids online for sex to figure out what the patterns of concern. 98% of the time, that offender talked about sex the first day. 2/3 of the time, it happened within the first 30 minutes of the conversation. In this study, the offenders were male, in all cases, with an average age of 35, and they looked for victims within a close geographic proximity. So it's that idea of I'm going to talk to you about sex, I'm going to define healthy, and then I'm going to be the one who comes to meet you. And we look at the number one lure isn't lost dog, it isn't money, it isn't drugs. The number one lure is attention and affection. And how sad is that? Because our kids need attention and affection. I heard an offender on a panel. I was at a conference. They had folks who had served time for offending against kids on a panel, and they were talking about how they got away with their behavior for so long so that those of us doing this work could learn from them. And they had a gentleman on there who had spent time in prison for abusing kids. And he said, well, I got away with my behavior for over a decade because of how I picked my victims. He said, I would go to my kids' elementary school, and I would watch how parents picked up their kids. The parents who got out of the car was like, show me your artwork. What are you guys singing in choir? How'd you do on your test today? He was like, I would leave those kids alone because I could see they had that connection. They had that attention and affection. The parents who drove up, no conversation, no eye contact, no communication, kid jumped in the back seat, they drove away. I would say to my kids, invite those kids over to play. And those kids would come over and they would never tell because I would pour on attention and affection before the abuse and they had no one to tell. So I remember sitting there and my gut is just churning. I'm thinking, if he is that good at what he does, how can we who are invested in prevention do better? And a part of that is we need to be looking for the kids who don't have the attention and affection and helping build those kids up as a culture. Faith communities can be hugely helpful when they're healthy in doing that work. Mentoring agencies can be hugely helpful. Arts agencies, dance, music, sports. When they're healthy, these are places where kids get that attention and affection with no strings attached. So helpful. But when people are going into those communities trying to find kids who need attention and affection, they will find them. And if they're going online trying to find kids in need of attention and affection, they will find them. So we need to be better. That's why we talk about the adult responsibility. It's a trap, that attention, affection. And I think back just in my own life of times where I would have been at risk. I had a great family. I had a great childhood. I was a very quirky kid. I'm okay with that. But I was fine. But there were times where if someone would have like swooped in and be like, I am really sorry you didn't get the lead in the musical. I think your voice is amazing. I could just see how that would be like a trap that I could fall into despite having all those strengths. And so teaching kids we ask them to build their safety net of who are your 5 adults you can talk to if you have any problems. And then pay attention to anyone who's trying to separate you from your net. Because it could be an unhealthy adult on that net. Healthy people want to be a part of your net. Healthy people want to support you. Unhealthy people want to separate you. And that's not how nets work. If you're dating someone and they're like, you can't be friends with anyone else while we're dating, that's dangerous. If someone says, let's keep a secret about a touch, dangerous. That isolating behavior online is something that we really need to look out for. And then we as an adults thinking about who are the 5 kids we can be a net for. So it's not just on them. A lot of kids are what is called a compliant victim, still a victim. Compliant victimization doesn't make them any less of a victim, but they help keep it a secret. They help hide the behavior. They're not going to disclose because they feel like they have done something wrong. They are in love with this person. All of those dynamics. I had a case of a little girl who was being abused by a neighbor. I think she was 12. I think he was 28. And she didn't want to tell because he had given her a friendship bracelet. She's like, look at this. He loves me. Like a piece of string was enough to get her to buy into this idea that this was romance. So we need to think about policy always before there's a problem. If you work with a school, if you work at a scouting organization and they've been working on policies forever, but like faith communities, youth serving organizations, arts communities, thinking about online communication before there's a problem, what might isolating behavior look like in our community? For example, I was working with a group and there was a high school teacher who was texting his students. We were doing an adult thing. And I stopped him. I was like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, oh, we had a sub today. I'm just making sure that the sub did okay before I go back tomorrow. And I said, ooh, I wouldn't text your students. And he's like, Allison, you see the world in a very dangerous way. Most people are great, don't jump to these conclusions. And I was like, no, you're a young teacher. I said, don't you have a policy at your school of not texting students? He said, no, we don't have that policy. I said, ooh, I wouldn't do it. He's like, well, okay, but you see the world in a sad way and it's fine. 6 months later, I'm visiting my younger brother in Los Angeles and my phone blows up that this teacher is arrested for extorting his students and asking for sexual pictures. That was not where I was going with my little moment of for your safety, I wouldn't do this. But it's that idea, if we don't have a policy, people will use that against us. So being aware that in the spectrum of prevention, we want to be thinking about policy practices. So if you work for a church, what are your rules? Do you just say none? If you're under 18, don't communicate with adults. Is it group pages? Do you CC the parents on your texts? Thinking about that stuff before there's a problem. We start really young with internet safety with just 2 basic questions with body safety. Not do I know them or not, because in almost every case they know the person. Are they asking me to break my rules? Are they giving me an uh-oh feeling? And the uh-oh feeling, when they're older, gut instinct we call it. The tricky thing is the older they get, the more they argue against their gut, because their arguing brain kicks in. If they're 6 and they bite into an apple and it's gross, Dad, come get this apple, it's gross. If they're 14 and they bite into an apple and it's gross, come try this. Come look at this, this is amazing, right? It's like you're watching a horror movie and there's a rustle over there and something coming towards the teenager, and the teenager's like, that's so weird, I'm gonna go see what it is, right? We run into, and so we start young explaining about the gut and how the gut sometimes argues against our brain, but if our gut feels like something's wrong or something seems too good to be true, to step away. And to start with just the very beginnings, which is don't put stuff online you wouldn't want to see on a billboard on the highway. But also being aware that a lot of young people do make mistakes, and we don't want the message to be, and if you make a mistake, you're done forever. I had a 14-year-old being like, I've already sent out a sexual picture. Am I now done forever? No. We can rebuild an online footprint. We can give kids strategies to say, please don't bring up that picture I sent in 8th grade. That's before I knew anything about internet safety. I don't bring up stuff you did in 8th grade. We can build those strategies. I don't want anyone to feel like they're done forever. But if we can prevent, we're in a better place. Don't share your passwords. Junior high friendships might not last forever, right? Enough said, right? I used to say, I don't say it anymore, because I used to say your passwords are like your underwear. You don't share them with other people, and you change them all the time, because thinking that was like a fun, quirky way to remember it. But you never want to be fun and quirky with teenagers, because like a teenager raised his hand, and he's like, I'm an identical twin. My brother and I share underwear all the time. Like, what do we do with our passwords? And I was like, I don't know how to navigate this right now, so let's change the subject. So now I just say, I'm not quirky with it. I just say, your password's like chewing gum. You change it often, and you don't share with other people. Much less awkward than underwear. So there you go. When we talk about building your online footprint, you want to build an online footprint that opens up the doors to opportunities and doesn't close doors. We use examples. I mean, there's a soccer player who was about to sign to go pro, and they found that he had racist tweets on his Twitter account, and so they pulled the contract. And his argument was, those weren't my tweets, someone stole my phone. And it's like, well, you know, you have to own what's on your online footprint. You have to keep an eye on it, delete it, things like that. That's a whole article that I use when I'm talking to junior high students, that story. But just that idea about we want to own our online footprint, and we want to create things. We want to avoid open profiles. We want to try to keep things that are closed when we're young people. We want to avoid language that's racist, sexist, homophobic, anything that could provide more hate in the world. We want to not be a part of that. We don't want to put our full birthday online. It lets people know that we're young. It also makes it easier for credit card theft. We don't want to post our schedule online. Every app is different, and every app has its risks. Common Sense Media, anytime a new app is released, they do a good little overview for parents. Here are the pros, here are the cons, you can make your own decision. I love they have a chat feature, and like all the chatting is kids being like, my parents read this article and now they won't let me get this, and you're the worst. I think that I always find that somewhat humorous to read the chats under each thing. But any app should go through you. And that, I mean, on the phone, there's ways that you can make so that the apps don't show up. So if you're scrolling a phone, they can put in a vault app or whatever so that you don't see it. So check, you know, pretty regularly, see which apps are getting the most use on your family data plan. Because you might not see it on their phone, but it's going to come up as family data. They're using it. Which apps are they using the most? Talk to them. What are the 3 apps that use the most? Show me what the best thing is about those apps. A lot of those apps are catered to have an experience for you when you open it up that is based on how you've already interacted with it. So for example, TikTok has an algorithm that if you always click on and like videos of dancers, then when you log on, it's gonna show you more dance videos on your For You page. They joke often about like getting on the wrong side of TikTok. Like, why am I getting this? This isn't a part of my algorithm. This is on the wrong side of TikTok. So if you pull up a TikTok and you say, show me the 3 videos that are the first 3 videos for you. If they're about eating disorders and disordered eating and how to effectively have an eating disorder, that might mean that that's the kind of content that your young person is seeking out. And something to have a conversation about, right? So being aware that a lot of these apps, it's sitting down with them and saying, show me for 10 minutes how you use this app. Teach me. And then you have a sense of how they're engaging with it and that back and forth. But being aware you are allowed to say no to certain apps, and you're allowed to ask, why would you use it? Let's do a trial run. Here's the deal. I'm worried about your safety on that app because it has a lot of back and forth with people that you don't know. And has a lot of back and forth with people based on what you look like or images or things like that. So how would you use it in a way that's safe? Explain it to me. And have some of those conversations. Avoid addresses and phone numbers. And it's not so much the personal information that puts kids at risk. It's more the emotional information. It's less about this is I'm wearing number whatever for the soccer team. And it's more of I need someone to talk to because I have no one to talk to. But we want to do a bit of both. I was with 4th graders or 3rd graders, I don't remember. And I was talking about what personal information you don't put online. A little boy raised his hand. He goes, your garage code. I did that, and my dad got so mad at me. I was like, okay, so garage code, we want to avoid putting on the internet. And we want to be really careful about the photos that we share and the photos that we engage with. Now, I have a question for you. In our cases where kids are sexually solicited online, 5% of them will tell someone. It's far lower in online than in person. Why do you think that's so low, 5%? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so normalized to be approached for sex that they just block, delete, and they don't tell anybody about it. So that's part of it, is it's normalized. And we say, you can block and delete, but before you block and delete, please report. Please, because the next kid might not be as smart. But yeah, in some ways they don't tell because it's normalized. Other thoughts of why that's such a low number? They're afraid of the consequence. The two things I hear the most is I'm worried my parents will take my phone away, and I'm worried I just don't know what my parents would do. So to have a what-if conversation before there's ever a problem, where we say, here's the deal, if someone's making you feel unsafe on your device, I'm not gonna take it away from you, but I wanna know about it so we can work together to make it safer. I'm not gonna be mad at you, but I wanna know about it. So now let's do some what-ifs. What if a friend sends you a picture of themselves and they're not wearing clothes? Here's the deal, I would wanna know about it, I wouldn't be mad at you, and here's how we'd handle it. So we can think about this, so there's not the unknown. Like, what would my parent do? Because the two things that anecdotally they say, I don't tell because I'm gonna lose my device, and I have no idea what my parent will do. When we what if some of these situations, it builds those skills. It's like when we do mandated reporter training with adults. People sit down like, yeah, I'm a mandated reporter. I'm like, okay, well, what if? And I give you a what if, and then they look at me like deer in headlights, like, oh, I don't know if I'd report that or not. It's the same thing with kids. I know how to use the internet well. All right, what if? And what if builds skills, and they move from their passive brain to their active brain. So we think about that passive to active. Though with junior high kids, they do give us 2 recommendations with what ifs. Please don't use real people's names, that creeps them out. We do focus groups. What if your soccer coach Greg asks you to send it, they're like, what's wrong with Greg? What's Greg's deal? And at soccer, they're scared of Greg. Most people don't hurt kids. Let's not put clouds of suspicion on people. What if a coach? What if someone in our faith community? Not what if Greg? Ugh. The second piece of advice that they give us is please don't make direct eye contact when doing what ifs. And when they told me that, I was like, what? I'm all about are you with me? Are you active? Are we good? Are you falling asleep? You're okay? What's going on? And they said when your parents are staring into your soul, you can't think. Because they're like, what if you're at a party and someone's acting, and you're like, who have you been talking to, right? So what ifs, don't do it when you're in the car, walking the dog, not direct eye contact. We're dealing with sextortion cases more than before, where young people are sending someone a sexual picture and they're being extorted for that picture. If you don't give me $500, I'm gonna send this to your parents. If you don't meet me for sex, I'm gonna send this to your girlfriend, whatever that might be. We're seeing predominantly in Minnesota, and I don't know nationally, I was talking to the BCA folks, their case, there's a lot of male athletes that are being targeted. We also, non-heterosexual youth, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer youth are also being targeted because we think about where are they gonna get information about bodies, and where are they gonna seek that out? It might be from somebody. Most healthy people don't want to engage in a way that puts kids at risk, including most healthy folks who are non-heterosexual as well. This is an example of a case we had in Minnesota. Anton Martinenko targeted 178 high school boys that they were able to identify, that they were able to put name to face. Anton would go to the gym, would meet high school athletes, would come home, pretend to be female, would build up conversations with them. In some cases, pretended to own a modeling agency, would get them to send nude photos of themselves. And once he had athletes' nude photos, he would then sexually extort them. And it was horrific. He's serving 38 years in prison. And he kept folders of the nude photos. He would swap them. He distributed nude photos more than 1,000 times. If you did not pay him the money, or if you did not meet him for sex, he would send out the photos. So it's hugely fear-based. In October of the year, he predominantly targeted athletes 14 to 16. 2 of his victims later took their own lives. They're still investigating the case. When this article was printed out, they believe that he actually targeted 400 young men. He was sentenced to 38 years for his crimes. Anton came up on my radar for a very different reason. He was in the same cell as the person who took Jacob Wetterling's life. They were cellmates. Such a weird dynamic. So every time that this offender would be interviewed by police about where Jacob was buried, he'd then come back and talk to Anton, and Anton would tell law enforcement what he had said. So they shaved 2 years off his sentence. He didn't like solve the case. He didn't give any new information. He's not a hero, as he sometimes thinks he is, but he was in the same cell. And I'm just picturing these two individuals as roommates, and that's a whole thing. But you look at that targeting behavior, then we say, well, in this case, 2 of the high school students who are college students when it went to trial, 2 people were willing to testify against him in court out of the 178. Then you think about the gender dynamics of, we don't necessarily talk in our culture that all genders can be victimized. We think about the sense of, do we talk about this enough with athletes? Do we talk this enough with all groups of people? Do we let people know that if this happens to you, regardless of how old you are, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. This is on him. Any questions about that or anything else that I said? I haven't paused much for questions. It's always dangerous to say any questions when I'm in a room of kids, but it's not so dangerous when I say that with adults. Yesterday they were like, what breed is your dog? And I was like, okay, I can answer that one. I just meant apps, sorry. Oh, apps. Applications, I should. No, I apologize. I'm just using the old school term. Any app you add to your phone, be careful because each one has its own risks. Not college applications, job applications. I'm less worried about that. Thank you for clarifying. I'm sorry that was the old retro language. Sometimes I need to dust stuff off a little bit. Any other questions? And anytime you have a question like that, there's probably 3 other people being like, thank you, I had the same thing, so thank you. When it comes to sextortion, about half the time, the perpetrator does follow through on their threats. Many victims don't say anything. Most of the time, half the time it happens before they turn 18. And the important piece is half of these participants were in a prior romantic relationship with that person, sent the photos when they're in a romantic relationship, the relationship ends, and then they're extorted for the photos. So it's not always the unknown person that you meet at the gym. The last thing I'll say about the Anton Martinenko case, just because it blows my mind, is the thing he was most upset. I've co-presented with the person who arrested him, so like the BC agent does like a deep dive into the chats or whatever, and then I do the like prevention message for parents. The BC agent said the thing that he was the most upset about at the arrest was that that the gym was pulling his gym membership. That they're like, you can't come to our gym anymore because that's where you're trolling for boys. You can't come here anymore. That's the thing he was most livid about. Like, he's gonna be working out in a different place for 38 years. You know, but that was just the cognitive distortion of that was his fixation. Anyway, these are just the things that keep me up at night. If kids are being coerced offline, they're often also being coerced in person. So if you are in a relationship where someone is forcing you and coercing you to take a sexual picture of yourself, you're also probably being pressured to do things sexually in person that you don't want to do. And so the big piece is to teach kids that when someone says no and it's about bodies, you don't need the word because after the word no. And also, we don't want to be the one who keeps asking once someone has set a boundary. I'll talk more about that, but later today. But we've seen a 150% increase in sextortion cases, and that continues to grow. And so part of that is telling young people we don't want to send sexual pictures of ourselves, and the other piece is we don't want to be the one asking for the sexual pictures of ourselves. Someone wants to talk to us about sex online, it's probably problematic. And then we just look at the interesting thing that if sexting was happening, they tended to have more symptoms of anxiety and depression than if abuse was happening in person. We think about, where are these photos going? Who has them? I've lost control. You see these, they're a permanent record, and then you stumble, like those feelings, those that they bubble up. It's not a one-time event that you're processing. It's ongoing. And I want to say that there's always the opportunity for healing. There's always the opportunity for help. I get frustrated in my line of work. I always hear the phrase, hurt people hurt people. That's not what I experience. I experience that healed people heal people. If we say hurt people, some of our best advocates are people who've lived through family violence, and they're like, never again. Some of our best online advocates are kids who've been cyberbullied, and they say never again. So healed people heal people. So we educate differently based on what we know. Sorry, let me go back one. We talk about your gut online. We talk about reporting things that are concerning. We guard our emotional information. We don't meet people. We identify who our 5 adults are who can serve as our mentors. Bullying behavior, going back to Barbara Colaroso's work, it's not about anger back and forth. It's not about conflict. It's about contempt. It's top down. I'm better than you. I don't, and similar to sextortion, it is easier to bully somebody when we don't see them as a whole person. When we see them as a screen name, or we just see them as body parts. We don't see their dreams, their hopes, their families, all the people who care about them. And so bullying behavior is easier online because it's easier to reduce someone to not their whole person. There's not a one Band-Aid solution that reduces bullying. It is about the more comprehensive programs. Oh, this is Dr. Jehovenen's research. The credit is on the next slide. The 3 groups that are most often targeted with in-person bullying in schools, which then correlates online, is kids who are overweight, kids who are involved in special education programs, that's gonna come up on the next slide, and kids who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or are perceived to be by their peers. And so we need to deal with the fact that special education students, sadly, report more often being victimized by adults in authority, that their teachers, their administrators, things like that, the staff are more likely to bully kids in special education programs. So what do we do about bullying behavior? Well, it's far less effective to have like everyone come in a room and talk about it for an hour. I do some of that work in the sense of just like creating what are the definitions, who are the people you can go to for help, sort of catching problems in the moment, but it's not long-term prevention. Someone's not gonna be dealing with something on their phone and be like, what did that lady say in the gym 3 months ago? That's not how it works, it's not magic. It is the investment of a community. And instead of awkwardly sitting down and be like, let's talk about bullying, it's about finding examples that kids can imagine themselves living in. Faith communities have a rich example in religious texts of, what happened in this story. Jesus at the well, things like that. Like, let's use these stories and see what do we do if someone's being outcast? What does it mean in our faith? History, English, phenomenal examples. I have to say, I love working with little ones. We're doing an empathy building workshop with little kids. And I said, you know what? Kids who read a lot of books tend to have higher empathy scores. Why do you think that is? And little kids were like, well, could you imagine what characters are thinking? And this little boy raised his hand. He said, Allison, I don't want to be the bad guy in someone else's story. And I just wanted to go home and cry. It's like, that's what this work is. We don't want to raise kids to be the bad guy in someone else's story. We want to raise our kids to be the bystander who sees something and they say something, become upstanders. We want to raise the kids who are advocating. We want to raise the kids who are being themselves. And a big part of that is diving into literature, diving into history. We need to acknowledge our history so that we don't repeat it. What did we do to make people feel less than? Yeah, that wasn't okay. Let's move in a different direction. Cyberbullying differs from different kinds of bullying, so you don't always know who it is. It can go on for a long time. It can go viral. So there are a lot of different dynamics there. Having one friend who cares about you in person is a great piece of prevention and of resiliency when someone's experiencing that. You might have tons of online followers, but who's that one person who you can sit down with and get some support? For the individual, the anecdotes against bullying is having a strong sense of who you are, being a friend, having at least one good friend, and being able to navigate groups, group dynamics. Oh my gosh. If you're a parent of a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grader, it's a lot of that kind of parenting is navigating group dynamics. It's okay to take a break from a friend group if they're not treating you well. That's allowed, that's okay. But when it thinks about the bigger power is other people witnessing something happening, a lot of people don't say anything because they feel like it's not their job. Bystander intervention, if someone, if one person is in this room and someone comes in and steals a laptop, it's like, hey, that's our laptop, what are you doing? In a large room, there tends to be a pause where we all look at each other. It's like if you're trained in CPR, they tell you to point to someone and say, you, person, call 911, because everyone else is waiting to see what to do. It's that same thing online where everybody's waiting to see what to do. And teaching kids to go from bystander to upstander doesn't mean going after the person causing harm. That makes it worse. How do we support the target? Is it sending them a private message saying, I'm sorry this is happening, no one else believes this. If you want to log off right now, that's totally great, you know, that kind of stuff. Middle school students who step into the role as defender have higher levels of social skills than those that don't step in. So that social emotional learning that we do in schools has a huge impact in the lives of kids. Youth producing their own sexual images and sending them is also a concern that we have. It can be considered child sexual abuse images. It's that idea of youth producing their own sexual images, also called sexting, is like a shortened version of that. And we see that becoming more and more common. And I think one of the pieces of that behavior is, oh, it's coming here in a minute. 1 second, I'll let you read that. There tends to be not a lot of negative repercussions when it's back and forth. I'll show you mine, you show me yours, we're moving on. I'm not agreeing that that's a good thing to do, but I'm saying that tends to be less of the negative repercussions than the sense of kids who are being coerced. I will not be in this relationship with you if you don't send me a picture. That's when we see a lot of the negative outcomes coming out. Interestingly enough, a lot of college students didn't know that this could be a problem legally. So having the conversation of this could be against the law and could be a big problem is the first step in the puzzle piece. But that's not how we deal with other issues. It's not like, well, drinking underage is against the law, so that's all we're gonna say about that. We then dive into the why. You know what, sending sexual pictures when you're under 18 is against the law, but let's talk about why. Because there are people who use these pictures to harm other kids by saying, look how happy she looks, can you try to take a picture like that? We don't wanna fuel the supply and demand. We don't want people to reduce you to just your body parts. It's easier to hurt body parts. If you just reduce yourself to your body parts, that's easier to be hurt. Let's bring back in the piece about your dreams, your hopes, you know. If you're in a relationship and someone's asking you, it's not your fault. You're allowed to say no. The most important motivation for sexting is peer pressure or coercion. So the messages change. I was talking to 8th graders at a confirmation retreat about sexting, and a girl said, well, there's a guy I really like, and he keeps asking me for a sexual picture. I'm running out of ways to say no. And so I asked the other kids, I'm like, what advice do you have for her? The first kid comes to the microphone and just says, dump him, yeah, you know, big cheers, big moment. Then other people were getting the more in-depth responses. And this young man raised his hand. He said to her, do you feel comfortable giving me this guy's number? Because in my house, we were always taught that when someone says no and it's about bodies, you stop asking. And so instead of telling her how to say no, why don't I call him and just tell him to leave her alone and to stop asking? Because we should spend less time telling her how to say no, and someone should just call him and tell him to stop. And I was like, I'll go home now. Like, you can finish teaching the class, young man. Like, we spend so much time trying to build up the skills of resistance. We also need to build up the skills of what it means to be healthy in a relationship. And it's not asking people for sexual pictures themselves. Most of these cases are not being prosecuted but there are a few different pieces. These are the cases that do get prosecuted. If there's malicious intent, if it's a part of bullying, if it's a part of coercion, depending how big it's distributed, it gets charged. If there's a large age difference involved, and how graphic the images are. So when prosecutors are trying to decide to charge or not, this is kind of what they look at to determine that. And legal repercussions vary. So the message isn't, don't do this because it's against law. That's one piece of the puzzle. But don't do this because it puts yourself at risk. Those images are out there. And it's also a big warning sign if the person keeps asking. This is just from the idea about people are more worried about the non-consensual acts that are above. This is from a study where the average girl in America could say no 3 times, and then she ran out of ways to say no. And they were giving examples of girls who had said no and then did end up sending the pictures because they ran out of ways to say no. And so I think about talking to Girl Scouts in middle school. What if someone I was giving a what if. I said, what if you're on your laptop and someone asks you to flash them on the webcam? How do you handle that? The first Girl Scout raised her hand. I said, yeah, what would you do? She said, do I like him? I said, tell me more about that, trying to keep neutral. Tell me more about that, advocate face, trying. And she's like, I just really have a hard time saying no to people I like, so I need to know before I think about what I do in the situation, do I like him or not, because that's going to change what I do. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And I think the what ifs have to include, what if someone we know and like asks us to do this? What if someone our family likes asks you to send a picture? What if someone I like, here's the deal, I'm not going to be mad at you. You're not in trouble, but I want to know. That idea about young women in the study were trying to navigate these by saying no, but then they couldn't figure out how to say no enough, so they don't have the tools to set the boundaries to say no, and then they comply. So again, not just about teaching them to say no, not putting people in this situation. So the usual alarms are like regulate the apps, monitor your kids, aren't as effective as teaching them about what healthy looks like in relationships. So if someone is acting in a way that's unhealthy, they have a context. Helping them practice their refusal skills. Helping with emotion control. The number one rule, I talked to the kids yesterday, when you're really upset, step away from your computer. When you're really upset, step away from your phone. That's when we cause the most harm to others, is when we're emotionally deregulated. And then helping friends put the brakes on dangerous choices. Where do they get the idea? This is from a text from my mom website. People screenshot texts from their parents. Mom says, hello, hot stuff. I'm new in town. I'm very attractive. Will you send me pictures of your private areas? No, I know this is you, Mom. Stop. Proud of you, honey. Keep making good choices. Love you, Mom. Like, this is a good what if. This is great role playing. Mom just needs to know that it says Mom on the top of the screen, but still good role playing. They're not making this up. Like they're living in this culture that we're creating for them. We can't vilify them for the culture we're creating. We need to make the culture healthier. We need to get upstream and make the culture healthier. And part of that is the access that young people have to adult websites and pornography. I have an hour presentation on our website, Zero Abuse Project, that lives there on how to talk to kids about pornography. So it was the number one question I was getting from pediatricians, because they want to talk to kids about it without making kids more interested in it. And here's the deal. Part of it is strategy building. You know what? You might go to a sleepover at someone's house. You might see something on someone's phone that's called pornography. Do you know what that is? If that ever happens, I don't want you to engage in that, because you can't unsee stuff that you've seen. And it isn't stuff that we want to engage in. And so let's think of 5 different ways we could get out of that scenario. You could turn to a friend and say, let's go outside and play basketball. You could make me the bad guy and say, my mom will never let me come over here again if she finds out about that. But part of it is that idea of respect, about seeing someone as a whole person. We can't unsee stuff, and we don't want to be engaging. The main thing that I'm worried about is kids who use pornography as their sex educator. It's my biggest thing that I'm worried about. I was working with high school youth, and it was a small group. It was like 4 guys. And the guy said, Allison, I've never been on a date. I've never held hands with anybody. I've never kissed anybody. So I'm watching a lot of porn. So when I find someone who likes me back, I'll know what to do so that I'm not behind. And when I'm in college campuses, I used to say, where did you learn about sex? The number one thing that I would hear was from older friends or older siblings. Now when I ask people, where do you learn about sex from in college campuses, the number one response I get is pornography. Pornography is a lot of things, but something to replicate, something to use as sex ed, it is not. It doesn't represent consent. It doesn't represent respect. It doesn't represent healthy. And I'm worried about young people who are seeing these images, then acting on what they're seeing. And we cannot let pornography be the sex educator of our kids. And so part of that is providing them with healthy. The other part of them is explaining the why. Listen, when you're engaging with pornography, then when you're in a real person relationship, it's hard to make the connection when this is what's been fueled into your brain. If you want to have healthy relationships, we need to do a better job of protecting your brain and your heart. Yeah, go for it. Right. A lot of pornography is not consensual. I'm saying the microphone just so you can hear, even though your voice is probably stronger than mine at this point. But yeah, a lot of pornography isn't consensual. A lot of pornography isn't there by choice. A lot of pornography is how much can this person take before this person breaks? How much can we harm this person? And it's not something in consensual, any kind of romantic consensual act, both people are enthusiastic participants. We talk about enthusiastic consent, holding hands, kissing, all the way to sex. Anything that is romantic should be enthusiastic consent. Pornography is how much can one person do to another. That's not enthusiastic. And that's not, in many cases, that person doesn't want to be there. And if you're really interested in learning more about that, you can go to the free hour-long thing that I was so depressed researching. So I was researching how it was infecting brains and hearts. I was so depressed researching. And when I was finally done recording it, it's like, okay, my brain needs a break. But then I would get calls from parents who needed that help, and it was good that there's that resource. A lot of parents say, well, what is the software that I put on my laptop so I don't have to deal with any of this stuff? PC Magazine every year releases a chart with different options, but it is one piece of the puzzle. You can't say, well, I have this product on my phone, so we're never going to talk about internet safety. That doesn't work. They're going to use it at someone else's house. They're going to find an old iPod, whatever it is. It's one piece of the puzzle to figure out. And then it can't be done behind their back. It's about building a connection. Hey, I'm going to let you know that we have this, and here's why. Just like when you're doing driver's ed, I'm worried about the other cars on the road. Kids are more open to the rules when it's framed around safety. So that allows us to explore their autonomy. I'm worried about this, it's not safe, so what do we want to do about that? Let's have a discussion. More than half of teens would rather go 7 days without their phone than having their parents look at their phone. So thinking about creatively, let's sit down and look at apps together, show me what you're doing in that app. On a phone, you can go to the top and type in a word, and a text will pop up if they've used that word, right? So you can use the search bar. Instead of like digging through texts and getting into their personal business, you can also just say, I'm gonna see if you're using this word, because if so, let's have a conversation about the words that we use online, right? Let's sit down and talk about it. It depends on age, obviously. When they're 10, 11, 12, it's a lot of checking, it's a lot of modeling. When they're older, they get, as they show they know what they're doing, they get more freedom. But with you paying the bill and with you being concerned, you're allowed to have these conversations and check in. Building their net, who are the 5 people they can talk to, hugely important. Anytime, this is my dog, Dobby. It's kind of hard to see Dobby. He passed puppy school. He didn't know how to bark. And then he went to puppy school and learned how to bark. I was like, no. But anytime I ask kids of who their 5 adults are, I always have a little one ask if they can put their dog on the list. Dogs are wonderful. We can practice talking to dogs, but they can't be one of our 5 adults. And the little one was like, but Allison, they don't interrupt me or tell me what to do. They just listen. And as parents, sometimes we have to clarify, are we listening to fix or are we listening just to let them vent? Sometimes we have to ask them, do you just want me to listen or do you want me to help fix? Because sometimes they don't want us to fix. Parents mediate media in different ways. It's sort of parents who believe that media influences what kids do tend to be more engaged in parental mediation. Here are just some discussion starters. We want to talk about this before there's a problem. What do you think checking in about your phone could look like? Where do we unplug? Where do we have those balances? Be aware that kids with high empathy scores get exhausted being the person who everyone goes to for help. So help those kids know that if someone is pouring adult level problems on them, where hurting is happening, you want to know about it, you won't be mad. This is just an example of thankfully not used very much at all anymore. This was an old app called Hot or Not, where kids would upload a picture and then people would rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 of how hot they were. So then you'd get your score of like 8.65 or whatever. You had to be 13 to use this. Imagine being 13 and knowing that you're a 10. Imagine being 13 and knowing that you're a 3. We as a culture can do better, and faith communities, youth-serving organizations can give a different message. We don't care how many likes you have. We don't care what your number is. We want you here as a part of this team, doing this thing, and that's a counterculture message for what they get on a lot of their apps. Apps go through you. I've talked about that already with the stoplight. And then as I wrap up, tips for parents and caregivers. Your kids are watching you. Start very basic. If they're gonna have phones, don't get something expensive. Kids lose stuff. Don't get something better than what you have. Make sure it's less than what you have. Dive into the why all the time. Look into your controls for options. Keep a united front. It's hard when parents are not living in the same home or separated or divorced, and one parent gets the kid the latest, greatest for Christmas, and the other one's trying to navigate that. Have a conversation with your former partner as best as you can and try to come up with some common rules so that kids know where they're gonna get the yes. And so if you're both on the same page, that's hugely helpful. And most people do wanna do what's in the best interest of their kids. Look into your control options. Give your kid a written journal. If they have questions, they can write in. You know your kid. If your kid starts separating, slamming down the laptop, not wanting to engage, it's a chance to sit down. If they don't want to talk to you because they're embarrassed, talk to one of their other 5. A lot of what ifs that end positively. I would want to know. I wouldn't be mad at you. Talk about consent with phones. Before you post a picture of someone, ask if it's okay. Right? Especially those friends' children, right? My kid's at a play date. Oh, this is a cute picture of this. Is it okay if I post this? Because it's your kid. We want to role model consent for kids with phones. Is it okay if I do this? Okay if I post this? Don't assume that if they're using it well at your house, that they're using it well everywhere. Continue to have conversations. Know who your 5 adults are as a parent. My mom was in a book club. I don't know if they ever read a book. She would just come home and be like, everyone in the book club has decided we're gonna do this new thing. And I'd be like, book club, you know, it's the worst. But who are your book club parents? Who are the people that you can, because with, you know, parents of 4-year-olds, be like, my kid is biting. She shouldn't be biting, she's told to bite. What do you do for biting? And everyone has an idea. I don't see a lot of like, my 16-year-old is obsessed with watching porn online. What are people doing about porn? Like, you don't wanna put that out for advice. You wanna have a one-on-one conversation for that kid's privacy and for your own. You wanna have a one-on-one conversation with someone you trust. Who are your 5 people as a parent you can reach out to? Limit times. Have times where there are no, somehow the tablet just doesn't work in my car. Sorry, it just doesn't work in the car. We're gonna have to talk about our feelings. Where do they go and why? Just like in person, you know those things. And then just keep checking in as they get older. So I'm gonna pause here to see before, and you'll see me later today. I'm gonna talk more about this stuff later today, but I wanna pause here and see, are there any questions before we go on to the next speaker? We do not have access to slides, but if you email me at Allison with 1L at zeroabuseproject.org. My mom's Australian. She said Americans add extra letters because Americans are excessive. So that's how you can remember 1L, Allison. If you send me an email, I can send it to you as a PDF. We don't send them out for a variety of reasons, but if you were here, I can send it to you as a PDF, sure, no problem. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna pop off the stage and fill up my water bottle, get some more cough drops before I see you later, and I'll allow the next speaker to come on. And thank you for being here.